So there's certain fundamental, well, there are differences in different states. I'm in California. There's certain fundamentals that are true in every state. And one is you want to have an attorney who's knowledgeable and can help guide you through complicated transactions. And I was introduced by one of my good friends to Neil Greenbaum, who's an attorney in the state of Florida. And so talk about real estate transactions and the business there. Neil, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Where in Florida are you located?
Hollywood.
Very nice. My best friend just moved to Dania, which is right next to Hollywood. And
Yeah, right
I used to live in Boca for a couple of years. And Boca's like my ex-girlfriend. I can't talk about it in front of my wife, but I have fond memories. So good for you. And so how long have you been practicing law?
30 plus years.
Wow, you don't look that old. Good for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Wow. And so where did you start in your legal practice? What was the area that you started in?
I'm from New York. I started in New York. I'm still a lawyer in New York. I have an office there too. I started as a trust and estates lawyer, but I didn't have enough gray hairs, I thought, definitely at the time. I'm not even sure now. And I've always been transactional. I'm not a litigator. So like now my practice is mostly real estate, corporate transactions and contracts.
Got it. And how'd you end up in that niche of business? What was it? Were you hired by a firm, or one came to you, or you start out? This is where you wanted to be?
I was hired by a firm, but I kind of geared myself towards that. I never liked litigation. I don't like arguing in front of judges. I don't like dressing up if I have to. Though in the old days we dressed up all the time. Now you don't dress up anymore. But I had a problem. It's like litigation is very like, okay, you have 30 days to do this, 20 days to answer. I just couldn't stand that. Though, of course, a lot of transactions, everything's calendared also, but it's just not the same. So I think with transactions, you're actually accomplishing something. Litigation could be years and years and nothing happens.
And so today's practice being real estate, what's the most common profile of your clients today? If you were to kind of describe an avatar of the most common one.
Probably an on the commercial side, it's probably like a multifamily investor. Though I do a lot of like warehouse as well, but sometimes users, but mostly investors. On the residential side, a lot of them are investors buying trophy properties. A lot of them doing short-term rentals. There's a big business in Florida in short-term rentals of big properties. We can fit like 10, 20 people to go for a weekend and spend the fortune. So I'm doing a lot of those.
And so somebody would come to you as they're buying, let's say, a multi-million-dollar house, so a $2-3 million property, and they would come to you, represent them instead of a real estate agent or in addition to a real estate agent, or where do you?
In Florida, the agents draft the contracts because they're really forms.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll review it. A lot of times they come to me after it's already signed, which is, I'm like, you came late, but okay, whatever. So, but I'll review it and make some comments, very little. Maybe I'll add one or two things, and it's pretty cookie cutter on a residential standpoint. So that's why there's a lot of leeway with regard to the brokers drafting contracts. Like in New York, brokers would never draft contracts, just totally different.
Right. And so on residential, that came to a contracts completed. A multifamily and commercial, are you drafting the purchase contract for the client, or is the
I'm either drafting or reviewing, either my side's drafting or the other side's drafting, and it's much more of a prolonged period in terms of negotiation with a contract on the commercial side than it is in residential. And but after that, like a lot of the nuts and bolts and the bones of a real estate transaction are the same, whether you're buying a $100,000 condo or $100 million piece of property. Right. You have contract, you have deposit, due diligence, title, financing, closing. So it's basically a 5-step process.
The contracts on multifamily, do they tend to be standard Florida Association Realtor forms, use air forms, or do you use custom forms typically?
So when I do a Florida deal, I'll usually use something called commercial contract, and then I'll add a writer. The commercial contracts will say 10 pages, and I'll add a writer, which could be 10 pages. Outside of Florida, it's going to be more of a non-form contract. It's usually in the 20, 30 page range also.
Oh, that's right. You also represent people outside Florida. Do you just where you're licensed, like just in New York, or do you 50 states? If somebody's a client's buying a property in a state you're not licensed in?
There are certain states that I'm more familiar with, certain states I'm not as familiar with. When it comes to real estate transactions, I wouldn't go to certain states where I'm not familiar at all, but otherwise they're mostly the same. I do sometimes need local counsel if I need an opinion letter, or I need to know some local nuances.
So, recently as a real estate agent, I had a transaction and the other party brought in a very high-powered law firm, and they proposed like a 150-page document for a $500,000, basically a vacant piece of land. And I had to go to my client and say, listen, I can't represent you. I'm not an attorney. I can read English, but it's a lot of work. Somebody's going to get paid to do that. You need to hire an attorney. Now, if we just say no and start with the California Association of Realtor Firms, I can kind of translate it and create a proposal. And while we went that route, inevitably, the other side, the attorney is bringing up certain legal issues that I think really require my customer to have an attorney to review something. So I'm sure this happens to you where a client comes to you and says, hey, I'm in a transaction. I thought it was relatively simple, but now I have this complicated legal question I need your opinion on.
Right.
In my mind, you've got to really start from scratch and review the whole document, the whole contract from beginning to end, right? All the correspondence, all the emails, all the notes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, the best time to go to an attorney is before you sign the contract. And as I say, I have plenty of people come to me after the fact. And I'm like, anyway, but because then they're in the deal. But it's funny, in the thing you mentioned, a $500,000 purchase price with a 150-page contract, I would tell my clients to find another buyer. That's overkill.
That's what I did. I just said it's impossible.
To the nth degree, that law firm is billing hourly, and they're out of their range in terms of the deal is too small for them.
Well, it's an interesting case in that they were buying like 8 other parcels in one block next to mine. That was a contract that was about $2.5 million contract. Maybe it's appropriate, maybe not. I don't know. Seems like a bit much to me. Huge law firm. But what's interesting is that seller is in court, and it's a conservatorship, which in California needs court approval for the sale. And they're begging the court to approve it quickly because they're facing some enormous penalty that the buyer put on them. If they don't clear by a certain date, they're subject to like $150,000 penalties. And I said, see, that's why did we sign that contract, because who the hell can read all that and figure out all the possible cases? And that's the law firm as a seller you don't want to work with. Nobody wants to be involved in the kind of a litigation and threats and things like that.
I agree. I had a story once where somebody sent, where my representing a buyer, and somebody sent the contract, and so I sent back my revisions, and they go, no changes. They go, we're not having any changes to the document. So I pointed out that the document was dated like 2 years ago. So maybe we could change the time space continuum, and then we won't make any changes. So okay, we can change that. In the end, the seller wound up firing that attorney because that attorney wasn't flexible enough to do deals. When you're buying or selling something, you have to have some flexibility. If you're going to be 100% rigid, you're not going to close a lot of deals.
It seems to me the key to being flexible is being able to understand the party and what their concern really is, so that you can possibly accommodate it or tell them why you can't. But if you don't understand what's driving them, that was my discussion with this attorney yesterday. I said, look, I'm not an attorney, I'll admit, but I read English. I'm pretty proficient on how it relates to real estate contracts. What is he trying to accomplish here? Why are you insisting on this, to me, seemingly duplicative phrase? And he gave me an answer. I said, well, that's good to know. In this case, it was more administratively efficient for them to rewrite the contract and my buyer agree to something that was potentially a problem. So do you have a general range? I mean, I know it's kind of crass to talk about legal fees, but as a real estate agent, I'm often asked, to refer somebody to an attorney, and then they say, well, what's that going to cost me? And I go, I have no freaking clue. It would be easier. I can say, I don't know, something between, an hour is this, or a couple hours, maybe review a document. What if a buyer's in escrow, has a contract, made a mistake, should talk to you at a time, didn't, needs to come to you? It's a fairly simple legal question that you're going to review one maybe major issue on. What's a typical time frame for you to look at that, and what's a common cost? Not to hold you to it, obviously.
I mean, I like to charge flat fees anyway. So even if I'm staying there if I come in the beginning, I figure out what, I give just an estimate based upon my experience of what it's going to take to do it. And usually it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But if somebody can't come, it's very rare somebody comes in, they have one issue for me to look at. Like, we have one issue, because at this point, I'll just help you finish the closing. That's what usually happens, and I'll charge a fee based upon that. And I mean, looking around at what the residential closings are like today, when I first started, and it's a long time ago, like closings of $500, $1,000, that's not going to happen anymore. I see legal fees rising in terms of residential, because there is a big time factor with regard to residential closings. A lot of hand-holding in residential, much more than in commercial. And if you're buying, let's say, HOAs or condos or co-ops in New York, then there are a lot of rules involved, a lot of documents you have to look at. If you buy a condo, let's say in Florida, they can give you 500 pages of condo docs. Now you don't have to look at not everything is pertinent, but you have to have an idea of what the person's buying. Are they allowed to, what's the resale process? Are they allowed to rent it out? There are rules involved. Same thing with HOAs and a homeowner association. That's an HOA. So, but I think legal fees overall on a residential property nowadays, assuming there's no hiccups and it's not like a 10, 20, $30 million property, would probably be in the $2,000 to $5,000 range.
No, that sounds reasonable. I mean, as a real estate agent, we're getting 2.5% on the deal, so it's.
Trust me, all lawyers are really very well aware what brokers and agents are making, because it's always a lot more than the lawyers are making.
Well, it can be. I mean, I hear that from attorneys sometimes, and sometimes, sometimes no, because you get your fees up front, and we only get it if it closes. And
no, there's a reason. The contingency fee that you're getting, I understand, like it's contingent, so if it doesn't close, right? And so it's interesting. I remember I spoke to somebody recently, and they were talking legal fees, but they want like trying to cut fees a little bit. I'm like, you're paying the broker like 40 times what I'm going to bill you for this. I mean, it was a significant difference. And like the extra $1,000 or $2,000 to me is not going to make a difference in this deal. Right. But of course, I mean, listen, I always take some money up front because, and not everybody does, but I just think it's important because if the deal falls apart, it's going to be much harder to get that money if you want to get some money.
Right.
So, I think, but the brokers, real estate agents, brokers, it's a contingency game, but the payoff is much greater.
I've had cases where where I'm getting a big commission, where I've, told the client, I'll discount my commission by this amount of money if you use an attorney that I know or can, vet, meaning somebody I can work with. I don't want to do that and then hire somebody who's going to spend their whole time telling my client I'm overpaid. That doesn't really make any sense. But as attorneys, we can work together and I can ask some questions and give the customer a better outcome. Yeah, he's doing some of the work. I don't want to review all the documents in detail. And attorneys usually are more adept at doing that stuff quickly. And I just find attorneys are very good at finding little details that I would miss. One sentence that's stuck somewhere that shouldn't be there, but has significance. I just don't proofread. In my experience, the way attorneys seem to proofread documents.
Right. Well, that's what we're good at, or what we've experienced doing. But I agree with you in terms of who you work with. Like if I work with a title company or a surveyor or somebody doing inspection or phase one, which is an environmental study, and I know these people and I have a history with them, it's much, I would say easier, but familiarity means a lot when you're working with the same people over and over again. I know what they're going to do. I know what I can rely on them for. I know what their work product is going to be. But if the client wants to use a different title company or what have you, then it's going to be different. And I don't know them. And there's a little more uncertainty. And uncertainty sometimes causes time problems and problems in general.
Right. What do you see as the biggest mistake the clients make before they bring you the contract to clean up the mess? When you say we wish you'd seen it beforehand, what's the most common scenario that somebody brings you something and you go, oh gosh, I wish you'd showed this to me before you signed it?
So on a residential, I mean, because it was until recently a seller's market, and the market's much better than I do, but like since interest rates changes and now it's harder to sell, especially in South Florida, limited due diligence periods. I mean, I had a client and I was involved from day one. There was 0 days due diligence. You're buying the property as is without looking at it, basically, without, but the price was fine. The buyer really wanted it. And I even put in because I have to CYA. I mean, you have to do due diligence when you purchase something for at least 6 figures. So I put in my retainer agreement that the client understands there is no due diligence. And I have advised them that it would be best to have a due diligence period. So a lot of times our client will sign a contract with like 3 days due diligence. Well, now you got to get an inspection done in 3 days. You got to make sure that you want to buy it. It's a very limited period of time. And a few years ago, 10, 15 days due diligence on a residential deal was much more common. On commercial deals, you need more time because you have to do environmental studies, and you usually need like 30 plus 60, let's say, maybe. So, but on the residential side, but most people don't go to contract commercial deals without going to an attorney. It only really happens on the residential side. So sometimes they don't have enough time frame, or they're closing in 30 days. Are you getting financing? Yes. And that's going to be really tight for a bank to give you financing in 30 days. Right. So things like that. They don't gauge the time frames sufficiently.
It's amazing. I know you've been in the business a while. It's amazing how long lenders still take. It's like everything else in life is microwavable or instant. You have an app, and it seems like lending, it still takes 30 days most of the time, by the time
There's a
they're said
reason,
done.
but we know the reason for that is not that the bank has to make a decision on whether to give a loan. The bank can make a decision to give a loan in 24 hours. But the money that is made on the bank on the secondary market, that when they package mortgages,
Right.
when we had that whole problem back in 2008, when they take your mortgage, they're packaging it and they're reselling it,
Right.
as part of a package to another bank, to another or servicer. So they have to have all their I's dotted and their T's crossed, and they have to have the right documentation and this and that, or else it's not going to be part of the package, and then
Right.
they're not going to make the money. So that's really, I think, the reason why it's such a prolonged time frame still.
I think also it's an industry that has, since 2009, has been able to get away with more demand than supply until now. And so the whole industry is built on, you have to wait in line for them because they're so important, they're so busy, that they, in my experience as an agent, really never gave service to the customer. It was really, the dynamic was always turned around. Even wealthy customers still kind of almost going begging, with rare exceptions, unless you're in private banking, still almost begging for money rather than the agent working for it and getting the paperwork done and moving things quickly, and the lenders being accountable. Even to this day, it just shocks me. As of this week, you would think lenders, when we have transactions, would treat people. I mean, I do business. I'm a high volume real estate agent. I do business all the time. Just to get a phone call returned, it's just like pulling teeth. I have high powered attorneys that call me back on transactions. Now, maybe because they're billing, I guess that's maybe part of it. But the loan officer is getting business from me. I just don't understand how they act that way, commercial and residential. The worst are commercial. I think they're like the worst of the bunch. They have two deals going out once. How much business can you possibly have that you can't return a phone call?
No, I think it's a personal thing. I mean, to me, in my business, like, I think the average attorney returns a phone call in, say, 3 days. To me, that's crazy. My business is I make more money by returning phone calls. That's how I get more business. So I never understood that personally. With regard to it's a personal thing. I mean, to me, I'm a quick responder.
Well, and also I understand, attorneys have, trials and how disruptive that is to your life, and trying to balance that and such. And it's funny because, attorneys tend to work in attorney time, realtors work in realtor time. When a customer asks me a question, they want to answer back within 5 minutes, and everybody's all panicked, both agents and the title and the escrow all emailing me what's going on. I don't know. I asked the attorney, it's going to take a couple of days. That's just how it goes in most cases. So,
right. No, I agree. I think it's important, like when people go to lenders, that and this is my personal opinion, obviously, they go to brokers rather than going to, like, I bank at Citibank, I'm going to go to Citibank and get a mortgage. I'm like, don't do that. Just go to a broker, because first of all, they'll rate shop for you, and then they're getting a commission on top of it. So they'll be incentivized to move the deal along more than the bank, which is just going to be, at the regular, progression of the bank, which might be very slow.
I basically agree with you. I would make two exceptions to that rule. One, if you're in private banking, like, to me, when I get a phone call from a private banker at Chase or Citibank, it's basically, Bill, just step aside. How fast you need the money, it'll be there, and it's done. Now, I'm not talking about the fake private banking where you have a couple $100,000. I mean, I know who they are here in LA, and when they call me, it's like, just, oh, great, that's like the cavalry's coming. Don't worry, your deal is financed. It's done. They'll fund it without the customer signing papers, it seems like to me. That's one exception. The other is, when you deal with a top mortgage guy at a top company, like, those guys are top because of a reason. They're rare. They're hard to find, hard to get to. But when you find them, I have a guy who's like one of the top 5 in guaranteed rate, national company from New York. Of course, the New Yorker moves to LA and kills it because they're just on top of everything so quickly. So I would say that's my
different frame of mind when you're from New York.
Different frame of mind. I'm like almost New York. I'm from LA. When I lived in Florida, I remember people would say, "Are you from New York?" And I always took that as a compliment, because that meant, you're working hard, you're moving fast, you're talking fast.
Well, people from New York, they move to Florida, and then, like, they're in line, like, at Publix, the big supermarket, and like, come on, like,
Exactly. Classic. My class experience at Publix is a lady from Long Island screaming at the cashier. Now, this goes back in the mid 80s, that they wouldn't cash her check from whatever the New York bank was that she was visiting from New York. And this is back in the days where Florida had different banks for every county. And so, like, lady, this is Florida. This is not New York. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about working with real estate agents. Do you have occasion to refer business out to agents? And what are obviously your customers have real estate agents, but when you have a chance and need some help, what do you look for in a real estate agent to work with for business on behalf of yourself or your clients?
So it doesn't always happen, not with my practice, that I have the ability to refer to agents, because I usually get the deals coming in, they're already done, you know.
Right.
But once in a while, there's somebody who's looking for something, so I refer out. I mean, to me, it's an agent who gets deals done, an agent who's good to work with, and doesn't want to, not somebody who's blowing smoke and wasting time. I mean, no disparagement here, but there's everyone has their attorneys are this way or agents are this way, but they're not. They're always great people in all these industries, and if you work with great people, the point is to continue to work with those great people.
What I love when attorneys just, I'm sorry. I love when attorneys disparage the average real estate agent. I go, yeah, isn't that great? That's my competition. Like if I'm better than them, I get business. That's really all I have to do. So, and the same with attorneys.
Same with attorneys acting a certain way, or like the attorney never returns my phone call. I don't, whatever. Like a lot of my clients say that you're not like a typical attorney. I'm not sure what a typical attorney is. I might not be like the television attorney. That I might not be like. I know what a typical attorney is, but I'm very big in terms of returning phone calls or speaking with clients. That's the bread and butter. So
communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think it's all about communication. Well, look, I really appreciate the chance to chat with you today. And obviously your wealth of knowledge on real estate, and I think more importantly, how to do deals in the business of how things are. And so just for anybody who's interested in getting in touch with you, I think the best place is at neilgreenbaumlaw.com. And on there you have 800 phone number. You got to contact us. Click book consultation. Is a consultation free?
Yes.
Very nice. So if somebody has a question, particularly on real estate transactions in Florida or business transactions in Florida, give him a call. Obviously he's knowledgeable and he works really with one of my favorite people. Shout out to Michael Zwick, who does inheritance. Now, how do you know Michael?
I know his father at first, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's a big accountant from Detroit.
Very nice. Yeah, he's been a really good asset to my business on finding heirs. My specialty is probate real estate. So I end up working with attorneys and commercial deals selling my listings, and more than any other part there. So good. Well, Neil, look, I really appreciate your time again. It's neilgreenbaumlaw.com, and really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.
Great. My pleasure. Thanks.